In the 1990s, a researcher gave a puzzle to hundreds of fifth-grade kids. When they finished, she said one sentence to half of them: "You must be really smart," and one different sentence to the other half: "You must have worked really hard." That was it. One sentence, the only difference between the two groups. Then she gave all of them a choice. Try a harder puzzle, one they might struggle with but would learn from, or try an easier puzzle, one they were sure to do well on. Here is what happened. The kids told they were smart, the ones praised for their intelligence, overwhelmingly chose the easier puzzle. They had been given an identity to protect. Being smart was now who they were, and a harder puzzle risked proving they weren't. The kids told they worked hard chose the harder puzzle at dramatically higher rates. Their success had come from something they controlled, so a harder challenge was just an opportunity to do more of what worked. Then she gave both groups a puzzle deliberately designed to be too hard for their grade level. Afterward, she asked how much they enjoyed it. The kids praised for intelligence said they hated it. Many of them lied about how well they had done. The kids praised for effort said they loved it. Many said it was their favorite part, and they reported accurately. Then the final test. Both groups received the same difficulty puzzles they had started with. The smart kids performed significantly worse than they had at the beginning. The hard workers performed significantly better. One sentence, two completely opposite outcomes. And the researcher who designed that study, Dr. Dweck of Stanford University, had just identified one of the most powerful psychological forces shaping human potential. She spent the next 30 years studying it. The findings are going to make you look at yourself, your children, your team, and your entire life completely differently. This is mindset. Everything in this book flows from one distinction, and it is one of those ideas that sounds almost too simple until you see how completely it explains everything you have ever watched someone succeed or fail at. Every person on Earth operates from one of two fundamental beliefs about human ability. The first is called the fixed mindset. The fixed mindset believes that your qualities are carved in stone: intelligence, talent, creativity, personality. You either have them or you don't. They are fixed traits, permanent, predetermined. The events of your life simply reveal what those traits are. In a fixed mindset, every situation is a test. Every challenge is a potential verdict. Every failure is evidence of who you actually are, not just what happened this time. And every struggle is a threat, because struggling means maybe you don't have what you thought you had. The second is called the growth mindset. The growth mindset believes that your basic qualities are things you can develop. Intelligence is not a fixed quantity. It is a capacity that grows through learning. Talent is a starting point, not a ceiling. The most fundamental abilities can be dramatically changed through effort, strategy, and the right guidance. In a growth mindset, every situation is an opportunity. Every challenge is a chance to get better. Every failure is information, data about what to try differently. And struggle is not a threat. Struggle is the process. Now, here's what makes this so important. These are not just two different attitudes, they are two completely different psychological worlds. Different goals, different responses to adversity, different relationships with effort, different ways of interpreting feedback, different long-term trajectories. And Dweck found them operating with consistent, predictable patterns across every domain she studied: schools, gyms, boardrooms, marriages, coaching relationships, parenting. The fixed mindset does not just limit performance in the moment, It limits who you become over time. Because every moment of fixed mindset thinking is a moment where the brain is prioritizing image protection over actual learning. And over years and decades, those moments compound. The growth mindset does the opposite. Every moment of growth mindset thinking is a moment where the brain is prioritizing development over appearance, and those moments compound too. The question is, which direction are your moments compounding in? Let's talk about effort, because this is where the fixed mindset does some of its most invisible damage. In the fixed mindset, effort is a bad sign. Read that again. Effort is a bad sign. Here's the logic inside the fixed mindset. If you are truly talented, if you genuinely have natural ability at something, it should come easily. Talented people don't have to try as hard. So if you have to work really hard at something, if it doesn't flow naturally, if you have to strain and struggle and push, that is evidence. Evidence that you don't have natural ability. Evidence that you are not one of the gifted ones. Think about how devastating this belief is in practice. The moment something gets hard, the moment you hit the edge of what comes easily, the fixed mindset interprets that difficulty as a verdict on your intelligence. Continuing to struggle feels like continuing to prove you don't have what it takes. So the least painful option is to disengage, lose interest, decide this thing isn't for you. Walk away while you can still tell yourself you could have done it if you'd really tried. This is why so many naturally gifted people never reach their potential. Not because they lack ability, but because the moment they hit something genuinely difficult, which eventually happens to everyone at every level, they interpret that difficulty as evidence against their ability, rather than as the normal experience of development. And they disengage precisely when continued engagement would have produced exponential growth. In the growth mindset, effort is the mechanism. It is how ability gets built. It is the bridge between potential and skill. It is not a sign of inadequacy. It is the literal process of becoming more capable. Dweck points to Michael Jordan. Michael Jordan, widely considered the greatest basketball player who ever lived, was cut from his high school varsity team. Let that sit for a moment. The greatest player in the history of the sport was told as a teenager that he wasn't good enough. His response was not to decide basketball wasn't for him. His response was to go home, go to his room, and cry, and then get up and practice harder than anyone around him. He became famous throughout his career not just for his talent, but for arriving at practice before everyone else and staying after everyone else left, for studying game film obsessively, for returning from his first retirement and spending an entire season essentially rebuilding his game from scratch. He did not have a fixed mindset about his ability. He had a growth mindset about what effort could produce. Now, Dweck adds a critical nuance here that is important not to miss. Effort alone is not the complete picture. Effort applied without learning, without good strategy, without quality feedback, can spin its wheels indefinitely. The growth mindset is not simply try harder. It is try, learn, adjust, and try again with new information. But the non-negotiable starting point is the belief that effort changes what you are capable of, that the hours you put in reshape the ceiling of what is possible for you, that struggling is not embarrassing, it is necessary.
Here is the second place the two mindsets diverge dramatically, and where the consequences are most visible. How do you respond when you fail? For the fixed mindset, failure is not an event, it is a verdict. It does not mean, I failed at this thing this time. It means, I am a failure. It is not a temporary description of an outcome. It is a permanent statement about who you are, about your intelligence, about your fundamental worth and competence as a human being. This is why failure is so catastrophic in the fixed mindset. It is not just disappointing, it is identity-threatening. It does not just tell you something went wrong, it tells you something is wrong with you. And when the stakes are that high, when failure carries that weight, the logical response is to avoid any situation where failure is possible, to protect yourself by never trying anything you are not already sure you can do well. Dweck found 3 consistent responses when fixed mindset people do fail: denial, minimizing what happened, reframing it, deciding it doesn't count, finding reasons why this particular failure is an exception that doesn't reflect on their actual ability. Blame. The test was unfair. The coach didn't play me enough. The market was impossible. The interviewer was biased. Someone else is responsible for what happened to me.
Disengagement. Losing interest in the domain where failure happened, deciding it was not worth caring about anyway. Walking away, but disguising the retreat as a choice rather than an escape. Sound familiar? Because these 3 patterns show up everywhere. In students who decide a subject is boring exactly when it gets hard. In athletes who suddenly develop injuries when competition intensifies. In employees who stop trying after one project fails. None of it is conscious, none of it is strategic. It is the fixed mindset protecting the identity from further threat. Now, here is the growth mindset response to failure. Not celebration, not pretending it feels good. Failure hurts in the growth mindset too. Dweck is explicit about this. Losing a championship, getting rejected from a school, watching a company fail, having a relationship end, these are genuinely painful in any mindset. The difference is what happens next. Growth mindset people sit with the loss, they feel it, and then they ask, what can I learn from this? What did I not know that I need to know now? What strategy failed? What would I do differently? What skill do I need to develop? They treat failure as a laboratory, not a judgment. Dweck tells a story about a high school in Chicago that instead of giving failing students an F, gave them the grade "not yet." 2 words, but the psychological difference is enormous. F is final. It says you failed and the record reflects it, permanently. Not yet says you haven't gotten there, and the implicit message, the one that changes everything, is that getting there is still possible, that the path is still open, that this is not a verdict, it is a waypoint. The most successful people in any field have a distinctive relationship with failure. They fail more often than average because they attempt more, set harder goals, take bigger risks, and they recover faster, not because failure hurts them less, but because they extract learning from it instead of identity damage. Failure in the growth mindset is not the opposite of success. It is part of the process of getting there. Here is where this gets uncomfortably specific. Because the fixed mindset is not just for people who think they are inadequate. It is just as powerful and often more damaging in people who think they are exceptional. Let's start with school. The student who coasts through early grades on natural ability gets praised constantly for being smart. They build an identity around intellectual giftedness. School is easy. Teachers love them. Parents are proud. Being smart is who they are. Then they hit the first course that genuinely challenges them, the first material that does not come easily, the first exam where studying hard still produces a B. And something breaks. Instead of leaning in, instead of treating this as the first real opportunity to develop serious academic skills, they pull back. The subject becomes boring. The teacher is bad. The material is irrelevant. Grades slip, not because of inability, but because effort now feels like an admission that they are not as smart as the story said. Fixed mindset students choose easier courses to protect their GPA, They cheat to maintain the appearance of effortless performance. They drop out of programs that could have developed them enormously because the development process requires struggling, and struggling feels like failure. The student praised their entire life for being gifted ends up, in Dweck's research, learning less than the student who was told from the beginning that everything worth having requires work. Now let's talk about relationships. The fixed mindset carries a belief into relationships that sounds almost romantic but is actually destructive. It believes that a truly compatible relationship should be effortless, that if you are really meant for each other, it should just work. Problems indicate incompatibility. Having to communicate about difficult things, having to negotiate and compromise and work through conflict, that means something is fundamentally wrong.
This belief causes people to give up on relationships precisely at the moments when investment and effort would make them extraordinary. It also makes feedback in relationships nearly impossible to receive. When your partner says, "I feel hurt when you do X," in the fixed mindset, that is not information about a behavior, it is an attack on your character. So you defend or you shut down. Neither response leads anywhere good. The growth mindset person hears feedback in a relationship as information, not a verdict, not an indictment. Information about what is not working, about what the other person needs, about what could be different. That difference between receiving feedback as a verdict and receiving it as information might be the single most important distinction in whether a relationship deepens over time or slowly dies. Now let's go to the boardroom. Dweck studied dozens of major American corporations and their leadership cultures, and the pattern she found at the companies that collapsed spectacularly, Enron, WorldCom, companies at the center of the 2008 financial crisis, was strikingly consistent. Fixed mindset leadership at the top. Fixed mindset leaders surround themselves with people who make them look smart, not people who challenge them. They resist acknowledging mistakes because mistakes undermine the image of genius they need to project. They take credit aggressively for wins and deflect responsibility for losses. They punish people who bring bad news. And they build organizations where bad news stops traveling upward, because employees learn quickly that delivering uncomfortable information to leadership is a career risk. So the leader becomes more and more isolated from reality, more and more dependent on the story that everything is fine, until the gap between the story and reality becomes so large that it collapses catastrophically. The fixed mindset does not just limit individuals, it creates organizational cultures of fragility, where image management consumes the energy that should be going into honest problem solving.
Now let's look at what growth mindset actually looks like, not as an abstract concept, but in real people facing real difficulty. Dweck profiles a figure most Americans know, but few think about in this context: Wilma Rudolph. Born premature, survived scarlet fever and pneumonia as an infant, contracted polio as a child, and wore a leg brace until she was 12 years old. Was told by doctors that she would probably never walk normally. She became the fastest woman in the world, won 3 gold medals at the 1960 Rome Olympics. When people describe her story as miraculous, as if some external force intervened on her behalf, they miss the actual explanation, which is that she ran every day for years while being told by medical authority that running was not something her body was built for. That is not a miracle. That is the growth mindset applied relentlessly to a physical body that everyone around her had already decided was a fixed limit. Muhammad Ali, not considered the most physically gifted heavyweight of his generation, won because he was smarter, faster in his footwork, more psychologically sophisticated, and, crucially, trained with a level of obsessive preparation that most of his opponents could not match.
Lou Gerstner, who took over IBM in 1993 when the company was weeks from being broken up and sold for parts. He did not arrive with a pre-baked vision for what IBM should become. He spent the first months doing something almost no struggling CEO does. He listened. He talked to customers, employees, and industry analysts, and asked honest questions about what was wrong. He did not project false confidence. He acknowledged the depth of the problem directly. He built a leadership team that would tell him things he did not want to hear, and he created a culture where problems were surfaced and addressed, rather than buried and denied. IBM went from near bankruptcy to one of the most successful corporate turnarounds in American business history, under a leader who was not afraid to not have all the answers. That is the growth mindset in the boardroom, not the absence of pressure, not the absence of difficulty, a different relationship with both.
Here is the section that will change how you talk to every child in your life starting today. Mindset is not genetic. It is taught. It is transmitted intentionally or accidentally by the adults in a child's life, through the language they use, through the feedback they give, through what they praise and what they punish, through what they model in their own behavior. And the primary mechanism of transmission, Dweck's most important and most counterintuitive finding, is praise. Specifically, the wrong kind of praise. When you tell a child they are smart, when you praise their intelligence or their natural talent, you are, with the best possible intentions, planting a fixed mindset. You are teaching them that being smart is who they are, and smart people get things right, easily, without struggling. So the moment they encounter something hard, something that requires real effort, they experience a fundamental threat to their identity. When you tell a child they worked hard, when you praise their effort, their strategy, their persistence, their improvement, you are planting a growth mindset. You are teaching them that their success comes from something they control. The challenges are just invitations to apply more of what creates success. That struggling is not failure, it is the process. The specific words matter. You're so smart versus you worked really hard on that. You're a natural versus I can see how much you've been practicing. You're gifted at this versus your strategy for that last problem was really effective. What are you going to try differently on this one? Dweck found that the impact of these different praise styles appears almost immediately, even in a single experimental session. Children praised for intelligence become more risk-averse, more likely to lie about performance, and more likely to avoid challenge after a single interaction. Children praised for effort become more challenge-seeking, more accurate about their performance, and more persistent in the face of difficulty after a single interaction. For teachers, the implications are just as direct. A teacher who believes their students have fixed levels of intelligence, who mentally divides the class into the fast learners and the slow ones, will teach in ways that confirm that belief. They will call on the students they expect to get the right answer. They will give up sooner on students who struggle, and they will produce the outcomes that their beliefs predicted. A teacher who believes every student can develop significantly, who treats struggle as a normal part of learning, who gives specific, actionable feedback rather than global judgments, who tracks improvement rather than just current performance, consistently produces better outcomes, including with students that previous teachers had labeled as low ability. The most powerful thing a teacher can do has nothing to do with curriculum design or instructional technique. It is to genuinely believe and to communicate through every interaction that the student in front of them is capable of more than they are currently showing. That belief, held and expressed consistently, changes what students become.
Here is the most important and most hopeful finding in this entire book. Mindset can be changed. You are not permanently fixed in one mindset or the other. Neither are your children. Neither are the people on your team.
The fixed mindset is not a life sentence. It is a learned pattern of interpretation. And like any learned pattern, it can be unlearned and replaced. Dweck has tested mindset interventions with students, athletes, and adults across dozens of studies. And the most effective approach follows 4 steps that you can begin applying today. Step 1. Learn to hear your fixed mindset voice. The fixed mindset speaks constantly, but usually below the level of conscious awareness. It sounds like this: I'm not cut out for this. What if I try and fail? If I have to struggle, I must not be good at this. I don't want to look stupid. Some people just have it and some people don't, and I don't. Learning to notice when that voice is speaking is the essential first step. You cannot address a pattern you cannot see. Step 2. Recognize that you have a choice. The fixed mindset voice is not the truth. It is a habit, a deeply practiced, highly automatic habit, but a habit. And the moment you notice it operating, you have something you did not have before, a choice about whether to believe it. This is the gap between stimulus and response that Viktor Frankl wrote about from inside a concentration camp. The voice fires, but you do not have to follow it. Step 3. Respond with a growth mindset voice. Not toxic positivity, not pretending difficulty doesn't exist, not manufactured enthusiasm about something that genuinely feels hard. Specific, honest, growth-oriented questions. What can I actually learn from this? What strategy could I try that I haven't used yet? What would I need to develop to handle this better? Who has figured this out that I could learn from? If I approached this as if it were solvable, what would I do differently? Step 4. Take the growth mindset action. The shift has to show up in behavior, not just in thought. The growth mindset action is the one that prioritizes learning over looking good. It is taking the harder class, asking for feedback you might not want to hear, staying in the difficulty instead of retreating to comfort, getting up after the failure and asking what to try next. Dweck is honest. This is not a one-time conversion. Both mindsets live inside most people, and the fixed mindset voice will keep showing up, often loudest in exactly the moments that matter most. High-stakes presentations, critical competitions, relationships under stress. The practice is not to silence that voice permanently. It is to notice it faster, to interrupt it more reliably, to respond to it with the growth mindset perspective more automatically over time. And the cumulative effect of thousands of those small choices over months, over years, is what produces outcomes that look from the outside like extraordinary talent. But from the inside, they look like what they actually are. A person who kept going when it was hard, who kept learning when it was painful, who kept believing that effort was worth it, even when the results were not yet visible. That is not talent. That is mindset.
Let me make every section of this book personal. The next time you avoid something because you might not be good at it, catch that. That is the fixed mindset protecting your image at the cost of your growth. Ask yourself, what would I attempt if failure was just information and not a verdict? The next time you feel defensive about feedback, catch that. The fixed mindset hears criticism as an attack on who you are. The growth mindset hears it as information about what to do differently. Try asking, what is actually useful in what this person is saying? The next time you praise a child or an employee or anyone, catch what you are about to praise. Are you about to praise what they are or what they did? The first plants fragility, the second, resilience.
The next time you fail at something, and you will, catch the story your mind tells about it. Is it treating the failure as a verdict or as data? What would you need to learn from this to make the next attempt more informed than this one? The next time something feels hard, genuinely, uncomfortably, I want to quit hard, catch that too. Because that feeling is not a sign that you are in the wrong place. It is a sign that you are exactly at the edge of your current capacity, which is exactly where growth happens. The fixed mindset wants you to stop there. The growth mindset knows that the edge is where everything worth having is built.
Carol Dweck spent 30 years studying why some people reach their potential and others don't. She ran hundreds of experiments. She studied thousands of participants. She looked at some of the most extreme examples of human achievement and human failure across every domain she could access. And at the end of it all, the answer was not what anyone expected. Not intelligence, not talent, not family background or socioeconomic status or natural gifts or lucky timing. The most reliable predictor of whether a person reaches their potential was what they believed about whether reaching their potential was possible. That is it. The fixed mindset says you are what you are, prove it and protect it. The growth mindset says you are what you become, build it every single day. Mindset by Carol Dweck, one of the most important books about human potential ever written. If this breakdown gave you one thing you are going to use differently starting today, subscribe to Book Decoded. We break down the books that change how you think, how you lead, and how you live. New breakdown every week. See you in the next one.